John Schneider speaking with you guys out there and talking about a few different things. But the one clip that people are talking about, I guess, a bit is saying, Geno, we're going to talk to his reps coming up, and he's our guy. And I don't know that there was any real debate about that. Were you surprised by that at all, or was that kind of stating the obvious to you?
Yeah, no, that's stating the obvious. That's exactly what I expected he would say. Yeah, I mean, Geno, for sure, they want to try to work out a new deal with Geno and keep him around. And it's always, as always, a matter of kind of getting that done so it works well for both sides. And so, as John noted, Geno is under contract, so there's, in some ways, maybe there's a tiny bit less of an urgency than there was a couple of years ago when Geno was not under contract at the time. So, they could drag this out. But I would think they would want to try to get this done relatively quickly because that's going to be your highest paid guy. And so, when you're going into free agency and you want to know exactly what your cap situation is and all that, you would think you would want to try to get it done by then.
Hey, Bob, you still there?
Yeah.
Okay. So I feel like the whole conversation about the Seahawks has kind of gone from, okay, Geno. We heard Mike McDonald come out with a really strong statement about wanting Geno as his quarterback and DK. And now all of a sudden it's sort of shifting to offensive line. And do you feel like that's the big storyline as far as, because I think John drafted 3 offensive linemen last year, which was more than ever, I believe, as far as his drafts go here in Seattle. But is that going to be kind of what you're going to have your eye on and listening to? Because that, to me, that's kind of the biggest story, other than those 2 guys, I guess.
Yeah. It's certainly the biggest area that they need to address, right? I think that's been obvious for quite a while. And, it's why they made the coaching moves they made. That's the other reason why it's kind of the thing to focus on, because they fired Ryan Grubb as our offensive coordinator and essentially fired, Scott Huff as offensive line coach, and brought in a whole new group there. And they brought in kind of 3 guys who have some pretty significant offensive line experience to oversee that. Plus announced today that Jason Peters is going to be hanging around as well, and he's not going to be in a coaching role, but I think they hope that, the role he will have is sort of being an off-field mentor to these guys will also help the offensive line. They're trying to do things there. I keep getting stuff from people. What are they going to do about the line? They've done something pretty significant already by, blowing out the coach and bringing in a bunch of guys who worked together before and have a lot of experience with what has been a successful, the zone scheme that kind of popularized by Mike Shanahan in the 90s with Terrell Davis and all of that. That's what they want to do and what they want to try to get to. And so they're going to be looking for maybe a little bit different of an offensive line, guys who are a little bit more athletic, getting off the ball, kind of the speed and quickness to get off the ball. Not that that's ever not been important, but, if you're going with that as opposed to kind of a power scheme, it's a little more important. So, for those reasons, it's kind of the obvious thing, because a lot of the rest of the positions on the team, I feel like, are going to be pretty static. You obviously have some decisions you have to make about some guys, but the offensive line is the one position that when I think we get to training camp and stuff like that, could look quite a bit different, both in terms of personnel and just what they're doing.
How do you see them addressing it, though, Bob? Do you see them going out and getting experienced guys, or the draft? Like, could you see him spending pick number 18 on a guard, or do you feel like there's an urgency? Hey, we don't have time to let somebody develop. We need to get this fixed right now. How do you see him addressing it?
Yeah, for sure. I think they'll try to do both. The issue with the veterans is, who is it going to be? There's 3 or 4 guys who could become free agents, but between now and March 12th might not be. So by the time March 12th rolls around, that list might and probably will be shrunk quite a bit. So that's kind of the issue there. People are already talking about how this is one of the worst free agent classes in recent memory, because teams have just kind of been re-signing their guys, the guys that they want to keep. They've been able to do that. And so, the Athletic the other day, I think, had the list basically 22 guys that you would want to sign, and everybody else on their list was sort of somebody that's of all players, not just offensive linemen, were guys who had some kind of significant question mark attached to their name. So you're going to have to explore both. And they're not, and they, depending on how things work out, they may not have a ton of money to spend on external free agents. So I think they're going to try to do both. But, they're hoping, you've heard John, I know he said it with you guys, and he said it to us today as well about developing and how that's something else they need to do. I do think they feel like, with Cross and Lucas and Christian Haynes and Bradford and Oluwatimi and Jalen Sundell, who they might like a lot more than people think. And Laumea and Jarrell. I mean, that's like 7 or 8 guys that are all 3 years or younger in the NFL. And so I think part of their hope too is that the guys they're bringing in will make those guys a lot better, and that so that you can kind of work with what you have on hand quite a bit also.
Hey, Bob, is it still kind of the Disneyland for NFL executives and scouts? I mean, I remember the stories about Trent Kirchner, who's their director of pro personnel, that he stood outside. This is back, 20, 25 years ago. He stood outside of the combine with his resume and was handing it to people. I mean, you get lots of jobs that are taken there, or as far as the NFL, just guys breaking in as either a scout or a coach or whatever. Are you seeing lots of that there? Is that still kind of what the combine's about?
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of non-NFL stuff that happens here. There's a lot of the coaching groups that have meetings here, in part because of that, because they know there's a lot of networking opportunities, and there's all the bars at night where people try to hang out and see who they can see. And there's certainly the guys that do that, hoping to run into some coach that maybe they can just drop their name and and kind of go that route. And again, Mike McDonald talked last year, I think, when they hired Ryan Grubb, about how they first met at the combine a couple of years ago, and that started their relationship that ended up leading to McDonald hiring Grubb for a year anyway. But for sure, yeah. I don't know that you don't necessarily see a ton of people just hanging out holding their resumes, but you obviously see evidence of that happening with just a lot of the people that are here. And like I say, there's a lot of because of all the people that are here, this is just used by a lot of different organizations to kind of hold some events here for sort of those cross-networking purposes.
Hey, Bob, now that there's some clarity on Geno in terms of what their intentions are, I didn't hear any audio, but did anybody ask John about DK Metcalf moving forward? And if not, what do you think they do? He's going into the last year of his deal. He's the other big talking point, obviously. What do you think happens there?
Yeah, well, John made it fairly clear he wasn't going to give details about the specifics of negotiations, and I think especially with guys who are under contract. So he was asked a question about DK and where things stand with him, and he kind of played that one off as just saying, where do things stand with DK? Well, he's on our team right now, and I think the best, big, strong, physical receiver and things like that. So, they're not going to give details about things, but I think with the guys who are under contract, I think they consider them as part of the team until they're not, and is there the pot? I know everybody. I mean, he gets asked those questions because there's been a million stories speculating, like, what could the Seahawks do in case they wanted to trade DK Metcalf. There's never been any story that said the Seahawks are exploring that. That they've called teams and said, hey, do you want DK Metcalf or anything like that? So, at the moment, I don't know how much validity I'd put in anything about DK's future until you heard something like that from from the NFL Network or something like that. But certainly, the fact that he's entering the final year of his contract, again, we've always seen the Seahawks with their really core guys try to not let those guys, enter the last year with some uncertainty about their future. But I sort of feel like on the pecking order of importance of things, you've got to get your guys who can become free agents in 2 weeks, like Ernest Jones. You got to get those guys done, and then I think Geno, you got to have a pretty good idea of what you want to do with him, so that you sort of are able then to lay out the rest of what you're going to do. So you know what you have going forward with everything else. And then I think a guy like DK is something you could maybe do a little bit later if you wanted. But I haven't gotten the vibe that they don't want him to still be part of the team going forward.
He is Bob Condotta of the Seattle Times, joining us live from the NFL Combine and keeping us up to date on what's happening out there. Great stuff, Bob. We appreciate it as always.